Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the 17th meeting of the 38th session of the Human Rights Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. It is my pleasure to welcome the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, Mrs. Sheila Kitarut. And now I'll invite Mrs. Kitarut to present her report. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present my fifth and final report since my appointment as the mandate holder for the situation of human rights in Eritrea. In this last report, I provide an update on human rights in the country and reflect on my 6 years as a mandate holder. I thank the Human Rights Council for the trust and confidence placed in me through my appointment in 2012. I regret, though, that I'm not able to report demonstrable improvements in the human rights situation. The main violations identified in my first and subsequent reports, as well as those of the Commission of Inquiry, persist. Patterns of human rights violations ascertained over time continue, namely arbitrary arrest and incommunicado detention, indefinite military national service amounting to forced labor, with a range of violations committed in this context, as well as severe restrictions of fundamental freedoms. When arrest and detention used as a form of punishment for legitimate and peaceful exercise of fundamental rights, including freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of assembly and association, freedom of religion, they are arbitrary. I have documented several deaths in detention over the past year. For example, an evangelical Christian from an unrecognized church died in August 2017 while in prison. The person was arrested during a house-to-house raid in the dead of night at home without any search or arrest warrant. During detention, the person's health deteriorated rapidly. Reportedly, the detainee died on the way to the hospital. All deaths while in detention need to be investigated promptly. Families whose loved ones died in custody should be informed about the cause of death, prosecution of perpetrators, and they should obtain reparations. I am worried about the continued detention of children. I spoke to the parents of a boy who was arrested after the funeral ceremony of late Haji Musa Noor on 3rd March 2018. He was with other children below 18 who were rounded up just after the ceremony. The child has been in incommunicado detention since then. While some children have been released, an unknown number is still in detention following those events. In view of serious human rights violations in Eritrea, I'm very concerned about efforts by some countries to limit access to protection, contrary to UNHCR guidance and obligations under international law. According to the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, an Eritrean national died on 6th of June 2018, just a few days ago, at a detention holding area at Cairo International Airport, where he was held in transit while awaiting removal from the United States to Eritrea. His body was buried in Eritrea last week. Several issues need to be clarified, including the circumstances of his death. Eritreans continue risking their lives to flee a climate of repression and human rights abuse in their country. I reiterate my call to host countries to provide protection to Eritreans and refrain from sending them back as the risk of punishment for having left remain high. Both the Commission of Inquiry and I repeatedly called for the implementation of the 2000 Algiers peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and the 2002 decision of the Eritrean-Ethiopian Boundary Commission to delimit the border between the two countries. We have also stressed, however, that non-implementation and a status quo cannot serve as justification for Eritrea's repressive practices, namely violations in the context of the national military service. I therefore welcome recent efforts to reach peaceful solutions. In response to Ethiopia's recent declaration to fully accept the border ruling, Eritrea announced its intention to dispatch a delegation to Addis for constructive engagement. I call on both parties to ensure that human rights remain a central consideration moving forward. I also call on the international community, member states and the United Nations to use their good offices to facilitate a dialogue which would lead to enhanced respect for human rights. Mr. President, I will stop here and gladly respond to any question and engage in the interactive dialogue.
I thank you very much for this introduction of your report. As it is the practice in our discussions, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned. And now I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. President, in the last 6 years, Eritrea has been subjected to harassment under the country-specific resolutions and mandates of the Human Rights Council. As pointed out on many occasions, this is not driven by concerns of grave human rights violations. The overarching political objective of the principal architects has always been to vilify, destabilize and isolate Eritrea, and human rights mechanisms have been misused as an extension of regional conflict. It's unfortunate that the Council is discussing the final but unwarranted and recycled report of the special rapport. The lack of objectivity and professionalism is again manifested in the unsubstantiated allegations, denial of Eritrean achievements, and the midst of no tangible progress, continued concern, lack of genuine commitment, etc. Once again, the goal is to recommend unwarranted extreme measures, or at least sustain the harassment and confrontation by extending the counterproductive mandate. Consequently, Eritrea's ground reality continues to be negated in the reports at hand in violation of the UN principles of interlink between peace and security and human rights and development. The mandate deliberately fails to appraise the Council on concrete progress that includes the promotion of equal rights and opportunities sanctioned by national law, equitable distribution of resources and wealth, responsible popular participation in governance, and unity and diversity reflected in societal harmony. The attendant exemplary peace and stability earned through sustained effort, resilience and sacrifice that ensure advances in human rights, betterment and development of all Eritreans is again misjudged in the report. Mr. President, Eritrea recognizes that it still faces, like many other nations, institutional challenges in consolidating a robust framework of human rights. In this respect, it has both reviewed its domestic legal architecture of laws and regulations enshrined in the revised civil, penal and commercial codes, and also signed and implements almost all core regional and international conventions on human rights. Stemming from its holistic approach on the indivisibility and universality of human rights, it has gone further to incorporate and implement basic social human rights in its laws and strategic development plans. This has accelerated socio-economic progress, consolidated the rule of law, and strengthened national institutions. The commendable achievements included in most of the MDGs parameters widely recognized by United Nations and other development partners offers a glimpse of the true narrative on progress in spite of considerable economic and national security challenges that it has been facing for almost 20 years now. Eritrea has and continues to undertake tangible action to engage with its regional and international partners. It is indeed engaged in good faith in the Universal Periodic Review and is preparing the third cycle national report. It maintains that this is a fair and viable mechanism for expressing, sharing, emulation of best practices as well as an appropriate mechanism for engagement. The initial and combined report on African Charter for Human and People's Rights was also discussed in the 62nd session of ACHPR. As the mandate ends in the President's 38th session, the Council knows well that the aforesaid confrontational approach of the last 6 years has not created any dividend. The destructive intentions harbored under the rubric of human rights violations are also exposed. In this vein, my delegation once again reminds the Council of its obligation to adhere to the UN principles of objectivity, non-selectivity, and impartiality. In conclusion, my delegation rejects the report and makes the following appeals to the Council. 1. Bring to an end the unfair and counterproductive process and experience. 2. Adhere to the meaningful and constructive approach that eschews confrontation and double standards and focuses on engagement and cooperation through the universal periodic review process to which Eritrea is committed. 3. Ensure the engagement is dignified, fair, and befits the common ideals and shared responsibilities. 4. Objectively consider the recent dynamics and prospects of peace, security, and development in the Horn of Africa region. At a time when the Eritrean delegation is arriving in Ethiopia for pushing the peace prospects between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the Council should act in tune to the reality and should not lag behind and act for a viable future rather than entertain such an unwarranted report. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.